everyone. Um, Welcome to fall semester wine school. My name is Kelsey. I know that everyone is just joining now, so I'm going to give everyone time to come in, say hi to me in the comments while you're joining, and I'm going to get some wine open. But welcome and thank you so much for joining me. All right, so you can comment if you're on Facebook or YouTube, and I will be able to see your comments. So tell me where you're calling from. Tell me who's with you. Tell me if you're drinking the Cinsaut with me tonight from Lost Draw Cellars, from Lost Draw, from one of their vineyards called La Pradera. I am hoping that some of y'all attended last year's Summer Sippin' and are back to join me for more. Tell me whether that is your story or whether you are brand new to this. Right. So let me see where to start. Last year, I hosted a virtual series called Summer Sippin'. And by popular request, we've brought something similar back. Although it is no longer summer, now that everyone is back in town from their travels, from being in wonderful, glorious places, now that everyone's back, we're going to have a good old fall semester wine school. Ralph Chance, is that you? Hello. Hi, Lorinda from Merkel. Where is that? Tell me. And hi, Nathan. So we are on our first fall semester wine school, and we're going to start from the very beginning. Starting with, hello, my name is Kelsey. I am the Director of Education at William Chris Wine Company, which is a collection of brands, including Lost Draw Cellars, William Chris Vineyards, Grower Project, Skeleton Key, and Yes We Can Wines. And what we're going to be doing during this series is tasting a little bit of all of those. So you should have gotten, if you would like to drink along, a 4-pack of wines that we bundled together and discounted for you so that we can be tasting the same things as we go over some of the things that y'all come on site and ask about. And the reason this series was born is because as I'm giving educational experiences on site, as my coworkers are giving tastings on site, we get a lot of questions and we want the opportunity to answer all of them for you. Now, we've all noticed that those who come in to taste at Lost Draw Cellars and William Chris Vineyards, as y'all come in, we notice that y'all have a high level of education already, and sometimes we can't answer all of your questions in the moment. So I am here to open the door to bigger, deeper wine ideas. Hi, Lori, Lorinda, Sherry, nice to see you again. Kara, Sue, Donna, awesome. So thank you for using the comments, guys. This is where y'all are going to be able to ask me your questions this evening. We have about 30 minutes together, so I likely won't be able to get to all of them because what I noticed last year is that everyone's very active in the comments and y'all have wonderful questions. But I promise you that at the end of every episode, I always go into the comments and see what I've missed and what I haven't answered for you guys, and I'll answer it the next round. And the great thing is that these will remain recorded. So if you have to miss a week, you can always go back onto our Facebook and YouTube pages to check out what you missed, grab whatever bottle of wine, and I'll answer all of the questions for you. And you can watch recorded. Hi, John from Houston. So I am in Spring Branch, which is about 45 minutes from Johnson City, High Texas, and about an hour from Fredericksburg. So I hope we're all in different places across Texas and maybe even beyond. If you are not in Texas, by the way, I want to hear where you're calling from. And thank you for getting Texas wine delivered to you in one of the 38 states that we ship to. All right, so before we go into today's topics, next week, I want to let you know that we'll be drinking the William Chris Vineyards Mourvedre from the Texas High Plains. I'm sorry, my light is so bright, I know you can't see this. And then the week after, we will be drinking a Lost Draw Cellars Syrah. And then the week after, we'll be drinking the Tempranillo from High Cross Vineyards. And I put this pack together specifically for you guys, but also for me. This is some stuff that has not been released. It's also some of my favorite wines. So I'm really excited to taste through these for you. And if you like them, you can go on our shop and get some more. So today, We are going to start from the very beginning. Every single week, we're going to talk about a topic with wine, of course, and sip along while we talk about this topic. Today, we are going to go into chemistry, which is where wine all starts. You don't need to have a notepad for this. You don't need to have a pen or pencil. I want y'all to just listen, ask your questions, and gain what you can from this. But the ultimate goal of these is that wine is going to start to click over the episodes. One week we'll talk about decanting and the purpose of that, and what the techniques are that you should be using to get the most out of the glass. We'll go over food pairing in a couple different episodes. We'll go over blind tasting. We'll go over the color in wine. But hopefully you'll get all of the tips and tricks you need to get more out of the glass than you were able to before. Sound good? Awesome. All right, so first let's taste this wine together. I hope that before y'all smelled it, you looked at the wine and noticed all the chunky monkeys in there. Look at all that sediment that's in there. That's a beautiful thing. That is flavor right there. Don't be scared of sediment. This wine really perfumes out of the glass, doesn't it? So what I'm smelling is a lot of fruitiness, huh? Cherry, raspberries, spices, baking spices. Cinsaut is the grape in this. This is from a single vineyard in the Texas High Plains. Cinsaut is a grape that grows really well in Texas because Cinsaut likes a lot of warmth and a lot of heat. But it also grows in the south of France. It grows in Spain a little bit, and it grows in places like Lebanon and Morocco, where it goes really well with spiced cuisines, highly spiced cuisines. The other thing that I know about this wine is it can rack up quite a bit of alcohol. But this is medium, 13.4%. So we have a light, bright, fresh, and fruity wine. I wish I had an ice bucket with me right now because I think this would be really, really lovely, chilled, almost like a rosé. And if you look at that color, look at how light that is. That is very Cinsaut to have such a light color. And that's a sign to me that I don't need to treat this like a red wine. If I don't want to, I can treat it like a rosé or a white wine and chill it down a little bit. Kara's saying she thought something was wrong with the bottle because it had sediment in it. And I love that you said that so that I can say, no, that's a wonderful, lovely thing. So the first secret to wine is know what the producers are doing. Lost Draw Cellars and William Chris Vineyards both have a minimal intervention, light touch approach to winemaking, which means that we don't heavily fine or filter our wines for the most part. If we've left a little bit of sediment in the wine, it is for a reason. It's helping your wine last longer. It's helping retain the color a little bit better. It's giving you more flavor instead of stripping out what I call the soul of the wine. So these chunky monkeys are the soul of the wine, there for you to enjoy. So yeah, we appreciate them. But it is very much a Lost Draw Cellars thing to have that in the wine. All right, so please remember to ask questions during this. I want this to be a discussion. It's not a lecture, definitely. Before we hop into chemistry, I am a sommelier. I am a WSET diploma candidate. I'm a WSET instructor as well. And so teaching is my life's work. It is what I love to do. And the reason I've chosen to start with chemistry is because nothing can be unlocked about a wine until we understand what wine is. And I think we all come to wine and we all try to stick our noses in the glass for the first time. And we hear other people saying strawberry, raspberry, cherry, spices, whatever it may be, without understanding how all of that is even possible. Did we mix strawberry jam with this wine? No, we didn't. This is all grapes, only grapes. So how is it possible that strawberry can be in this wine? That is what we are talking about today. And hopefully that will help unlock some things in your mind so that when you come to the glass, you'll have a better appreciation and understanding of it. Because ultimately, our mind is playing tricks on us when we hold a glass of wine. So our minds are the first things that need to be unlocked. When we come to a wine and we know that there are grapes in this glass, and I say we didn't mix anything else in here except putting the wine in oak barrels, which can give a spice character. Otherwise, there is nothing else giving flavor in this glass other than the berries themselves. Just knowing that means that we're going to come to the glass and try to smell grapes in the glass. It is everyone's first reaction, I think, from what I've seen so far, especially when I have people in a class with me. They think they smell grapes. People will stick their nose in the glass and say, what do I smell? I smell grape juice. But let me tell you, this wine smells like anything other than grapes. And there's a reason for that. And it starts with chemistry. So during the winemaking process, all of the grape flavors that a grape on the vine would have been transformed into something else. And there are actually very few grape varieties out there that smell like grapes after the process of fermentation. So knowing first that this wine will not smell like grapes and almost can't smell like grapes is the first key to unlocking your mind. What our mind is trying to do automatically is trick us into smelling something that's not actually there. So we have to open our mind. If we know this isn't a strawberry, it's going to be extremely hard for us to imagine that this can smell like a strawberry. So go in knowing that anything is possible. And sometimes it helps to close your eyes so that your mind can play less tricks on you. And this is where your imagination comes in handy. And I will always tell people to look at the wine, look at the color, and think about anything other than grapes and start to tell yourself, what could this smell and taste like? It's light in color. And I see that it's a little bit dusty. So I'm going to imagine leaves. I'm going to imagine sticks. I'm going to imagine cinnamon. I'm going to imagine strawberry and raspberry because it's possible that they could be in there. And just telling myself that these are all possibilities, I am doing something to my brain to make it possible for me to then smell those things. And then you go in, close your eyes, and pretend that you are not smelling grape juice. And then it becomes a little bit easier to capture that cinnamon and that raspberry and that strawberry that this wine does smell like. All right. No questions so far? So I'm assuming that everyone already knows this stuff, so we can dig in just a little bit deeper. Okay, so where are these flavors coming from? If they're not coming from something that we've added to the glass, where could they possibly be coming from? And the answer is, of course, they're in the grape already. But why? So Cinsaut, for instance, is a grape variety. We've all had many different grape varieties, I assume. Cabernet Sauvignon is a grape variety. Pinot Noir is a grape variety. Grenache, Mourvedre, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, all grape varieties. And these grape varieties all have different characteristics inherently. So as we get cuttings from these grapes and plant them somewhere other than where they were first born, they will carry the same characteristics, and we domesticate them so that they do carry these characteristics alongside them. So Cinsaut, born in France, in Morocco, and Lebanon and Texas, it will have similar characteristics of red fruit, spices, and flowers like rose. That is a characteristic of the Cinsaut grape. From there are additional characters that can be gathered into the grape. And this happens during the ripening process. So during ripening, sugar is building up in the grapes. But what is built up with those sugars is a collection of nutrients. In order for the grape to ripen at all, it needs a small amount of water and a small amount of nutrients. And the nutrients, it pulls up from the soil, from the root system. The cool thing about the nutrients is that the nutrients that the grape is feeding off of are the same nutrients that all of the other plants in the area are pulling up as well. So these nutrients that the grape is pulling up is being pulled up by the oak trees nearby, or the cedar trees nearby, or the wildflowers nearby. It's the same nutrients that the grass is eating. It's the same nutrients that the garden next door is sharing. And underneath the ground, there are root systems connecting, passing these nutrients back and forth. As those nutrients are gathered up into the grape, they bind to the sugars. And so you have a collection of flavor compounds created, bound to these sugars, that is being shared across all plants. Now, these flavor compounds are locked with the sugars until the winemakers release them. Now, even though the grape variety has certain flavor compounds that are associated with that grape variety, the nutrients that have been pulled up from the ground will add additional flavor compounds that are unique to that area. Okay. Then we pick the grapes. If you taste a berry at that time, you will taste grape because the flavor compounds are locked with the sugars. You'll taste grape, you'll taste sugar, and the grape will be very bitter, but you won't taste anything else until we have fermented the wine. Fermentation is when the sugar in the grape is eaten by yeast and is turned into alcohol. Once this alcohol is created, the flavor compounds are released, and then we can taste all of these other things, anything but grape. Does that make sense? So this is the process that is the key to unlocking all of these flavors in the glass, so that we're not just drinking grape juice. We're drinking alcoholic flavor and tons of it. So this concept of terroir, a grape tasting different from place to place because of where it grows. It has to do with all of the conditions that the grapes are growing in, but a lot of it has to do with what plants and what in the area the nutrients are sharing with. Does that make sense? All right, allow me to take a sip. Throw in any questions you have about that concept, and then we'll talk about how these compounds change once the wine has been fermented and is in bottle. I'm going to check off my notes here. So I want to make sure that I tell you everything I had planned to tell you. By the way, I'm totally okay if y'all tell me what you want to talk about and I throw out my whole plan. Every single week I have a topic picked out, but if y'all will tell me what you most want to know about wine, I absolutely will change the entire plan and we'll talk about what y'all want to be talking about. And I think one of the most fun things about wine is that you could talk about it forever. It's really endless, isn't it? The conversations that you can have around wine, about wine, or about other things while you're drinking wine. Ralph, good question. Ralph says, do pesticides add to the taste? And the answer is no. Pesticides are sprayed on top of grapevines to keep pests away, of course. Fungicides are used to keep fungus away. And then there's something else that's used in addition. But they are sprayed on top of the grapes in very minimal amounts. And actually, trying to avoid the grapes is kind of key. And many places choose not to spray fungicides or pesticides on the grapes. But once the grapes come into the winemaking process, that's all removed from the grapes and is not a part of the winemaking process. But the people who are making these pesticides and fungicides, if they were adding flavor to the grapes, they would change their mix in order to prevent that from happening. The goal of the wine in the glass is that it's going to taste as naturally like the grape as possible. So having flavored pesticides affect the taste would be disgusting and very, very apparent. And unless you feel like you're tasting something chemical on the wines, you can be assured that you're not tasting anything chemical. Because all of these nutrients that the grape has pulled up and bound to the sugars are very, very delicate. That process of turning sugar into alcohol and releasing those flavor compounds, it's a rigorous process in order to capture really, really delicate aromas and flavors. And that's why the glass that you have is important. The glass is closed at the top and open down here so that the flavor compounds that are really, really delicate stay here so that you can benefit from them. All of that delicacy and subtlety is something that the winemakers have tried really, really hard not to cover up or diminish. And something like a pesticide, if it affected that, it would smash it really, really quickly. So that's a long answer to no, they're not affecting the flavor in any way. John, great question. How does the trellising, water, etc., affect the flavors? And there are so many ways to answer that question. So I'll give one answer that I hope covers at least the base of it. And then week by week, we can dig deeper into that. So something that doesn't really affect the type of flavors that come into the glass or into the grape, but affects the concentration of the flavors is how many grapes are on the vine. So the less grapes on the vine, the more concentrated your flavor compounds will become because the grapes have less competition. Less grapes on the vine, they're not competing for as many nutrients. More grapes on the vine, this means you get a bit of a diluted flavor effect. So if you can put your nose in this glass and really readily pick out strawberry jam, you know that there was a low enough amount of grapes on the vine in order to get a concentrated strawberry flavor. If there were more grapes on the vine at La Pradera Vineyard when we harvested these, you might get a hint of strawberry jam, but it would mix in with other flavors or it would become kind of nutty. So we know that there was a lower yield of the grapes that year, less grapevines on the vine. Now, trellising and water and soil type and the type of drainage and the wind and the sun, all of that affects how much yield the grapes have. So if you have very little water one year, you're going to produce less grapes and get more concentrated flavors in the grapes. Same with trellising. If you trellis the leaves upwards so that the grapes have shield from the sun, you'll have a different amount of grapes produced and more shade, and that affects many different things in the concentration of the grapes. I hope that answered your question at least loosely. It's a big idea, but the answer really is that every single thing we do in the vineyard affects the grapes. How many grapes are produced, how they express themselves, the thickness of the skins, the size of the berries. It is everything that you can possibly imagine, which is why we have 12 of these episodes coming up, because there's so much to talk about. Olivia, good question. So because the grapes and strawberries are planted together, these taste like strawberries? No. Cinsaut automatically comes with a red fruit character, whether it be raspberry or strawberry, that is inherent in the grape variety. But because, let's say, there are oak trees planted around that area where this vineyard is, those oak trees are passing nutrients, and so you get a spice, a woodiness in this wine alongside the Cinsaut strawberry character. This is why you might also get a slight herbaceous or rose character off of this wine. That is possibly because there is something like that planted nearby. And if you get something like a Cabernet Sauvignon from Australia, there are certain regions in Australia that have a lot of eucalyptus planted nearby, and you can smell the eucalyptus in that wine, but that is specific to that region in Australia. And then along with that, the Cabernet Sauvignon tastes like blackcurrant. It tastes like green bell pepper. And so you get some inherent grape variety properties along with some other compounds that were shared by plants nearby. Does that make sense? Donna, La Pradera Vineyard is in the Texas High Plains in Terry County. It is managed and partially owned by the Andy Timmons family. So if you've had Lost Draw Vineyards fruit or Timmons Estate fruit, you are getting wine that was grown by Andy and Lauren Timmons. Sue asks, what about the fires in California? How will that affect the wine's flavor? Mostly smoke will clog the grapes. Well, actually they'll clog the leaves, the pores in the leaves, and that is responsible for respiration. So in order for the grapes to be produced and to ripen, you have to have airflow and sunlight and sufficient water in order for the grapes to ripen. And if the pores of the leaves are clogged, it'll actually inhibit grape ripening. But some people do say that smoke taint is something that does affect the flavor of the wine. So yes, it is all possible. Caitlin asked, where are the grapes fermented and how long does that take? Yeah, so fermentation is something we were going to talk about next anyway. So during the fermentation process, this is when yeast is eating the sugar and it is turning that sugar into alcohol and then releasing carbon dioxide. And it also breaks the bond between the flavor compounds and the sugar so that you can taste all those flavors. Fermentation can last anywhere from a couple of hours to months, just depending on what you're looking for. If you have a long, slow fermentation, you have the potential to capture really, really delicate flavors. And this is a technique that's often used for white wines. This Cinsaut fermented for 7 days, and that is a good standard for red wine. So during that 7 days, the skins, which have all the color in it, are sitting with the juice, which is fermenting, and the color can be extracted into the juice. It's a nice 7 days, and that went through fermentation in a large oak foudre, which ultimately is adding oxygen into the process. And this will further develop the flavor compounds in the wine. And that's where all the flavor compounds that have been released from the sugar start to expand and contract and change form so that they can develop. So when you hear someone say a wine is tight, it needs oxygen, and the oxygen will iron out the tightness of the wine and allow the flavor compounds to stretch out and breathe. And they will change as they're in contact with oxygen. And that's the next idea that we're going to go into. LS, good question. So LS has read that a vine grows best in a dry, hot climate. Yes, these vines are grown in the south of the Texas Panhandle, kind of northwest Texas. All of Texas is hot. Not all of it is dry, but the regions where grapes are growing in Texas are largely quite dry. We just don't have a lot of rainfall. The benefit of having hot, dry conditions is that you get excellent ripeness. And as sugar increases in the grapes, it's pulling more flavor compounds and nutrients from the ground. So you get more flavor compounds with riper grapes. But also the dryness will prevent too many grapes from budding on the vine. And we talked about this. Less grapes on the vine means more concentrated flavors. So yes, hot, dry regions in the Texas Panhandle, like at Pradera Vineyards, is wonderful for producing really concentrated grape varieties, which is why you can stick your nose in this glass and say, I should smell red fruit characters. And yes, I really do. Strawberry and raspberry all day. And it's not just strawberry, it's strawberry jam. And it has mulled spices in it. And I can get that because of our hot, dry climate and intensely ripe and concentrated grapes. I'm very proud of. Nathan asked if Lost Draw and William Chris try to be organic. Organics means using no synthetic compounds. And there are certainly many alternatives to synthetics, and William Chris and Lost Draw works with both kinds, but it really depends on the region. And because there are such harsh conditions in Texas, it is necessary to use some, but using those minimally is, of course, a practice. And I would say is a major practice with most grape growers around the world. We are not trying to, produce grapes through unnatural methods, absolutely. But will we go through the 3 to 5 year process that it takes to become certified organic? Likely not. It costs money to get the organic certification. And instead, we choose to just grow grapes honestly and make better choices year to year. And that does include using less synthetic chemicals. I hope that answered your question. We are sustainable. And Nathan, I think when you say dropping fruit, you mean green harvesting, when we go through the vineyard and drop some of the fruit in order to concentrate the remaining grapes. And yes, that is a practice that we do use. And John, I think that answered your question. Is the yield actively managed? Yes, we actively manage everything. All of our winemaking with Lost Draw and William Chris happens in the vineyard. So if we don't treat the grapes right, they cannot pull up adequate nutrients from the ground, they cannot produce grapes that are suitable for making wine in a minimal intervention process. We have not added anything to this wine, which means everything we did was in the vineyard to make sure that we got a concentrated, nutritious, rich flavor in the grape itself. And then all we had to do was just release it during fermentation and allow it to shine on its own. And indeed, we used 90% neutral oak for this wine. So you shouldn't be tasting a lot of oakiness from oak in this wine. You are tasting the grape itself and everything that it pulled up from the ground and all of the plants that it shared nutrients with. And Kelly, final question. How many years would it take for the vines to take on eucalyptus or other flavors? It doesn't take that long. If you plant vines, it takes about 3 years for the vines to produce their first fruit. And every single year, the next crop will become more and more intense. It wouldn't actually take that long for it to produce eucalyptus flavors because the nutrients are being pulled directly from the ground, and that's what gives it the flavor. I hope that made sense. All right, so let me take a sip, refill my glass, and then we'll talk about oxygen in wine. So after the nutrients have been pulled from the ground and created flavor compounds that are specific to the land around it, and after fermentation has released the flavor compounds from the sugar, and we have alcohol and all of these other lovely flavors, then what? And that's what we're going to answer now. But first we drink, because that's the ultimate goal. And honestly, last year, as I was doing these, I was just forgetting to drink the wine with you guys as I was talking, because I could talk about wine forever, and I can talk about talking about wine forever. So I must reward myself with a sip of this delicious wine. These glasses, by the way, I found, I love the Gabriel glasses that we use at William Chris and Lost Draw because they're crystal. But I found these lovely $10 glasses that I am all about because they allow the aromas to really blow up in the glass because they're so tall here, which I love. But ultimately, what these glasses are doing are adding oxygen to my wine. And that is the wonderful goal. And that is where we have the power. So the discussion really is, we have done a lot to make this wine the way it is. I did nothing to make this wine what it is, but the people that I work with worked really hard to make this wine the way it is in the vineyard, in the winemaking process, etc. But from here, once it's bottled, once I have this wine at home, it is up to me to do what I will with it, because the flavor compounds that have formed in this wine are still in grape juice. And ultimately, a wine will start as grapes and then eventually end as vinegar. And it's our jobs to grab this wine somewhere in between there and get it to drink at its prime time. And we're the people who help get it there. So once your wine is in contact with oxygen, it is slowly getting to become vinegar. And there are different times when you can add oxygen to the wine. But a major part of it is in the glass. In this glass, the surface area of the wine is up here, and there's oxygen getting to this wine. This wine is slowly becoming vinegar in the glass. Now, it takes a long time, but ultimately, after a day, 2 or 3, we put this in the refrigerator, we put it out on the desk, it's slowly becoming less aromatic, less intense. It's slowly going towards that becoming bad area. And how we treat it can slow down this process. So in the winemaking process, once the sugar has been fermented and turned into alcohol, we've released these flavor compounds, but they're really tight. They're tight flavor compounds. And the winemakers, what they're doing, what all winemakers around the world are doing once they fermented their wine, is they're maturing the wine to loosen up those flavor compounds and get them to blossom so that when we pop the cork and when we sip this wine, it doesn't smell and taste tight. It is ready to drink. However, there are different choices that winemakers use in the winemaking process to keep the wine tight so that it can age longer in bottle, or to keep the wine tight so that we can decant it ourselves and release the flavor compounds in the decanter. As these flavor compounds release, they can also change. So the releasing happens when oxygen is pulling at the flavor compounds, loosening it out, and eventually pulling it apart, which is why flavor compounds can change while it's in the glass. If I decant this wine, the flavor compounds will change faster. And why? Because I'm adding more oxygen to the wine, which gives me power over how this wine tastes. So the consideration when opening the wine is how much oxygen needs to be in contact with this wine. And there are a couple of clues that you can use to tell you how much oxygen the wine needs. It is very difficult for a winemaker to tell you how much oxygen a wine needs or whether to decant it or not, because they ultimately don't know when you are going to be opening this bottle. Some people choose to age their wine. Some people choose to drink the wine right away. And so it's difficult to give, just a blanket answer of you should or you shouldn't do this. So it's up to us to decide and know how to treat these wines. So if we know that wine is a living thing, and we know that the flavor compounds are going to change as the wine is open and as oxygen is circulating in here, we can make educated choices to slow that down. And one great way to do that is with temperature, because oxygen, It's oxygen transfer, the rate of oxygen transfer slows down as your wine is cooler. So putting this wine in the fridge will help the oxygen slow its process in breaking down the wine. So always, once you've opened your wine, if you're not going to drink the entire thing, if you're not that thirsty that night, or you're not sharing the wine, put it in the fridge so that it will slow down the rate of oxygen transfer. The other way to slow down this transfer is by putting something like argon or nitrogen on top of the wine. And there are different tools that you can use to do that. There are aerosol cans full of argon gas that you can spray on top of here, and it blankets the wine so that it's no longer in contact with oxygen. It doesn't change the flavor or anything. It just prevents the wine from reacting as quickly with the oxygen. And that will allow us to have this same glass tasting this same way for longer. And that'll help your wine last for a week or two instead of 3 days, which is really, really lovely. And something that I do with almost every single wine that I drink. I hate pouring wine down the drain. If you smell and taste this wine one more time, there's something else that the wine is telling you. Smelling this, I smell a little funkiness. Is anyone else getting a little just funk on this wine? Maybe it's mushroom, maybe it smells like an earthiness. It smells just a little bit funky. This is a sign that your wine needs a little contact with oxygen before you enjoy it. And the way you can do that is through decanting. So just pouring from one vessel into another and stirring it around. I'm helping the wine loosen up and get to where it was, or get to where it wants to be. And the oxygen will help pull apart the funky compounds and release them. If you have a decanter, try that. Try decanting just an ounce of your wine every single time you open a glass, and you'll learn more about the wine once you've done that little bit of oxygenation. And now I smell, and it's perfuming even higher than it was. I can smell no more of that baking spice. It's now all fruit and flowers. I can smell like a fresh grassiness. The wine is going through a journey. And this is because those flavor compounds that were gathered up in that grape are continuing to change for me, because ultimately the wine is living. Yes, John. The wine for me takes more than 2 days to finish. The great thing about my job is that I get to taste so much great wine, but I'm not able to finish all of the wine I drink. I end up having to use tools to slow down the oxygen transfer and make it at a reasonable pace for myself. Awesome. So what we've talked about today is the chemistry of wine. This is the building block for everything else that we're going to talk about. We're going to dig deeper into decanting and talk about proper ways to decant. There are many different ways to decant a wine, and we'll talk about how all of that change based on the wine. It changes based on what you want to be doing at home with the wine. It changes based on the food that you are going to pair with the wine. Those are all ideas that we're going to tackle. But please, next time, come in with what you want to be talking about during these, and I will, of course, adjust everything to you guys. So we talked about fermentation and how the flavor compounds can release from the sugar only through the fermentation process. Before that, your grapes just taste like grapes, and fermentation unlocks the key. And then we talked about oxygen transfer, which is the process of oxygen continuing to change the flavor compounds in the wine. Before we have the winemakers are doing some oxygen transfer in the winemaking process. And this is the process of aging wine in barrels or stainless steel tanks before bottling. It doesn't always happen, but yes, indeed, this wine was aged in oak barrels for, I think, 16 months in small barrels. So there was a lot of oxygen in contact with this wine before it was even put in bottle. So what that means is we don't need to decant this wine too hard. We don't need to introduce too much oxygen because the winemakers have done part of that process for us. But there are some wines that you'll smell and you won't quite be able to get a ton from the glass. It won't perfume up as much as this one. And that is a wonderful sign that you need to unlock the wine by adding oxygen to it. And in that process, you decant. Nathan, should we try and maintain the recommended temp while decanting? That's a great question. Temperature when decanting will change how fast the oxygen transfer is. And I recommend that you keep that temperature stable. Yeah, because ultimately you're trying to get your wine to a certain temperature so that you can enjoy it the best. If the recommended serving temperature is 59 degrees for this, yes, I recommend chilling it down to 59 degrees and decanting it at that temperature or just a little bit cooler. Because remember that once you put the wine in this vessel, the temperature of it will start to bring the wine up a little bit in temperature. So maybe 57 or 58 degrees, decant the wine, let it sit out for a couple of minutes or stir it, and then it'll be right at your recommended serving temperature. And another little tidbit to help you with that is to keep your wine at the recommended service temperature. You can't just chill this down to 60 degrees or 59 degrees and then leave it there because it will slowly start to rise in temperature. So get just a little flat bucket of ice and set it right on top. And after 10, 20 minutes, you pour yourself a second glass, take it out of the ice, and it'll help maintain the temperature. But if you pass it back and forth between the ice, that'll really help. And the same goes with the decanter. Put your decanter on ice to help maintain that temperature. And again, you're not trying to submerge it in ice. We're not trying to chill this down to white wine temperature. The way to maintain the recommended service temperature over maybe an hour of drinking a bottle, if it takes that long even, is to have ice at your disposal, just in case. Eduardo, how does alcohol content change the smell? Sometimes it can overpower it. Yes, that's very astute of you, and you're completely right. Alcohol will smell sweet. Ultimately, alcohol is a sugar. You convert the sugar to alcohol. It's still a sugar. It's just in a different chemical format. So alcohol can smell really sweet. And if the alcohol is high enough in a wine, it can overpower those really delicate flavors. And yes, absolutely. Harvesting a grape when the sugar is too high will mean that your alcohol is so high that it covers up all these really delicate flavor compounds. And that's typically when winemakers choose to oak their wines. They will add a strong baking spice component or cedar component from an oak barrel in order to help cover up how high the alcohol is. There's no other way to get around the smell of alcohol. You just have to have powerful enough, concentrated enough flavors to stand up to that, or you have to do something in the winemaking process to help balance out that alcohol, like oak aging in some new oak barrels. In this wine, the alcohol is playing a part. It's only 13%. It's not a high alcohol wine, but it's making the fruit smell a little bit sweet, but it's balanced. So you can smell still roses and cedar and cinnamon. And that is all about harvesting the grapes at the right time. If you've let your grapes ripen for too long, yeah, you have a lot of sweet alcohol aromas to compete with, and then a really strong alcoholic burn once you taste the wine, which can fight with flavors that you really want to be getting at. So it's all in the winemaker. It's all in the harvesting time and how the winemakers treat the wine from there. And finally, Donna asked, what about a wine aerator? Yeah, wine aerators can be wonderful things. You just have to use it at the right time. And what we'll be talking about in these courses is how there's no one solution for every wine. I would not aerate this wine, for instance. I would gently decant it, but I would fear that an aerator would change this too fast. Because it is fresh and fruity, and because with gentle decanting and swirling, all of the funkiness went away, I know that this wine is going to change really, really quickly, and that an aerator may start to harm the wine. Because ultimately, we don't want to push our wine towards becoming vinegar. We want to help it stay within that safe zone where we get all the benefit of the flavors, but we don't convince them to rush out of the glass before they're ready to. And I had a great image in my head when I was thinking about answering this question, because I knew somebody would ask it. If I dump this wine in a bowl and I blow bubbles into it, will it aerate faster? Yes, it will absolutely aerate faster, but I will start to lose things from it pretty quickly. So yes, add oxygen to the wines, but be discreet about it. Do it in a slow process. So for instance, take your aerator, aerate a couple of ounces of the wine and smell it and see if it's doing a good thing to the wine. Sometimes we decant the entire wine and then taste it and realize that we've killed the wine. We've pushed it past the point where it wanted to be pushed. And so always assess your wine first. Pour 2 ounces of the wine, smell it and taste it, and make an educated decision, knowing that oxygen will change your wine, knowing that you want to release flavors that might be tight, knowing that temperature does matter in how fast the wine changes, and then make a decision from there. And luckily, we have 24.5 beautiful ounces in here, so we can test out the wine and play around with it to see what works best. And my guess, Donna, is what you'll find is that the aerator is great for some wines and not good for other wines. And as you play around with it, it'll become clear what works best and what doesn't. But always smell for funkiness. If there's funkiness on the wine, pull out the aerator. You're likely in for a really cool magic trick. Aerate the wine and it'll all blow off because it needs it. All right, this will be the last question, and then we'll hop off for tonight. And then next week, y'all will bring the Mourvedre from the Texas High Plains. And I'm going to do a little experiment with this wine. So if you can, bring 3 glasses for next week and a decanter if you have one. And we can do an exercise together. Last question, Kara asked, what is the difference between decanting and aerating? And the difference is how we talk about it. That's it. Decanting and aerating both add oxygen to the wine, but decanting is the term we use when we use a glass vessel, and an aerator is the term we use when we put something on top of the bottle and pour it from there. Both are accomplishing relatively the same thing. It is all for the purpose of adding oxygen. All right, I hope that answered your questions, and I hope that you'll start to add more in the comments so that I can answer them for next week. But otherwise, we are done this week with our first episode of Fall Semester Wine School. Come in next time with 3 glasses if you have them and a decanter if you have one. And we will do a little bit of exercise playing around with oxygen interaction in wine and finding out what it actually does for us. So thanks so much for joining, guys. If you haven't already purchased your pack, you can still go online and get it and drink along with us. Otherwise, bring in whatever you want to be drinking. Whatever it is, as long as there's something, we can drink along together. And I just love doing that with y'all. Alrighty, guys. Glad to be back with y'all, and I will see y'all next week. Have a good weekend. Bye.